My family said I was cold. But how warm would you be if your brother texted, "Don't show up. My wife thinks you're embarrassing on the morning of his wedding." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. While they danced under string lights in Austin, I made one decision that shattered their perfect new life. I took back everything. The $350,000 condo, the $35,000 Europe fund, even their honeymoon flights. And when their calls started piling up in the hundreds, I realized revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just finally letting someone face the world without you. I'm Rachel Monroe, and this is my quietest revenge. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. The office was finally quiet when the message came in. Quiet in that specific way late afternoons in Seattle always felt when the rain turned into mist, and the whole city seemed to exhale. I had just closed the financial review for Harborline Hotel's quarterly board meeting, my eyes still adjusting from hours of spreadsheets and negotiations, when my phone buzzed on the corner of my desk. I didn't check it right away. I thought it was Jordan from accounting following up on the revised projections, or maybe my assistant reminding me of the vendor call I'd pushed to tomorrow. It wasn't until the second buzz, short, sharp, that I reached for it. It was a text from Ethan, my brother, 29, the kid I practically raised, the person I'd sacrificed years of my life for without thinking twice. His name on my screen already made my stomach tighten because Ethan rarely texted anymore. Not unless he needed something. But it wasn't the sender that made my breath stop. It was the message. "Haley doesn't want you at the wedding. She said it'd be pathetic." For a moment, my brain refused to process it. The words sat there. Ugly, jagged, impossible. I read it once, twice. By the third time, my thumb trembled just enough to make the screen blur. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows of my 17th floor office. The city lights smeared across the glass in gold reflections, all of it calm and indifferent to the way my chest suddenly felt hollow. I didn't react. Not out loud. Not even a whisper. It was like someone had blown out a candle inside my ribs. I just stared. 15 years of working double shifts, of saving every leftover dollar, of choosing Ethan's every need over my own. 15 years of holding his life together after our mother died. 15 years of being the safety net, the emergency contact, the one person who never walked away. And all I got was a text. 12 careless words. The phone felt suddenly heavy in my hand. I set it down gently on the desk, afraid the movement would break something fragile. Something inside me I wasn't ready to look at yet. I opened the bottom drawer. The small wooden box inside was old edges worn from years of being moved between apartments, between phases of my life. I lifted it onto the desk and opened the lid. On top was a photo of my mother Diane, holding Ethan when he was maybe 5. His cheeks were round and sticky from popsicle juice. She was laughing, her head thrown back like she never knew the world could hurt her children. That picture always made my throat tighten. Today it felt like a hand closing around it. I traced their faces with my fingertips. "Mom," I whispered under my breath, "is this what you would have wanted me to see today?" No answer, of course. Just the quiet hum of the building's HVAC system and the rain softening into mist. I placed the photo back, closed the box, slid it into the drawer again. For a few seconds, I let myself sit in the silence. Not grieving, not angry, just stunned, like the moment after a car crash when your brain hasn't caught up yet with what happened. Eventually, I reached for my phone again, turned it face down without opening the message a second time, and pushed the device away from me. If I didn't create distance right now, I knew exactly where my emotions would go. I'd call him. I'd ask why. I'd try to fix it, to explain, to beg for a reason, and I refused to be that woman today. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly, counting backward from 5. When I opened them again, the haze was gone, replaced by something steadier, sharper. I reached for my laptop. The screen lit up bright against the dimming office. I typed in my password, opened my personal financial planner, and clicked on the tab labeled Family Support. Rows of numbers unfolded. Monthly transfers, tuition deposits, housing payments, insurance deductibles, the European Graduate Program Fund I'd started contributing to when Ethan was a freshman. All of it. Every quiet sacrifice. Every dollar I'd justified because I loved him more than he ever knew. The rain got louder, tiny drops racing down the window in thin, trembling streams. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, not ready to click anything yet. I kept staring at the list, the totals at the bottom of the page. Numbers that told a story nobody else ever cared to hear. I exhaled, long and steady. "I don't need an invitation," I said softly, letting my voice fill the room. "But I deserve respect." The words didn't shake. They didn't crumble. They settled into the air like something final. Outside, the city kept glowing. Cars moved across the wet streets like small rivers of light. Somewhere on the floor below, someone laughed, one of those loud, carefree office laughs that made everything feel normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. I leaned back in my chair, letting my hands rest in my lap, the faint warmth from the laptop brushing my palms. A small click sounded from the radiator as it adjusted to the room temperature, and it made something inside me shift. Resolve. That's what it was. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. If they didn't want me in their future, then they wouldn't keep taking pieces of my past. My eyes lingered one last time on the closed drawer where the wooden box sat hidden. The photo inside. The girl I used to be. Then I straightened my posture, brought one hand back to the laptop, and clicked the first line on the spreadsheet. It opened with a quiet sound like a page being turned. The storm, if you could call it that, began there. Quietly, methodically, with the soft glow of a computer screen, and my heartbeat steady in the stillness of my office. I didn't know everything yet, but I knew this. Something had shifted permanently, and I wasn't going back. I can still remember the smell of that summer. The dry Colorado heat mixed with the faint sweetness of the lilac bushes my mother planted along the front yard. It was June of 2010, and the air felt different that morning, as if the world had already shifted before I even knew it had. I was 22, standing in the doorway of our small house just outside Denver, still wearing the blouse I'd picked out for my final interview with a company in Chicago. I thought my life was about to begin. I didn't know another life was about to end. The knock on the door was soft at first. I thought it was a neighbor, but when I opened it and saw the 2 state troopers standing on the porch, hats in hand, everything in my body went cold. They asked if I was Rachel Monroe. I nodded, and one of them exhaled the way people do when they wish they didn't have to say what comes next. There had been an accident, a drunk driver. My mother didn't make it. I didn't cry right away. I just felt my legs fold beneath me, and suddenly I was sitting on the floor, my back pressed to the wall. Their voices fading into a muffled drone, like someone had shoved my head under water. The only thing that broke through was the sound of Ethan's sneakers pounding down the hallway as he ran toward us. He was 14, lanky hair too long, the kind of kid who always pretended to be tougher than he was. But when he saw the officer's face, his knees buckled. I caught him before he hit the ground. His hands clutched my shirt so tight, I felt the threads strain. "Where's Mom?" he whispered, not wanting to hear the answer. I pulled him against me, trying to make myself bigger, stronger, older. Anything he could lean on. My voice didn't sound like mine when I finally said the words. "She's gone, Ethan," he cried then. Loud and broken the way only a kid who still believes the world owes him goodness can cry. I held him through it, feeling something inside me harden, settle, reshape. Dad didn't come out of his bedroom for hours. When he finally appeared, he was holding a half-empty bottle of whiskey, eyes red but dry. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask if we were okay. He just sank into his armchair like a man choosing to disappear while still breathing. I knew then that everything was about to fall on me. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of funeral arrangements, casseroles dropped off by neighbors, and silence so heavy it felt like another person living in the house. At night, when Dad fell asleep with the TV glowing in front of him, I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through Bill's insurance forms and Ethan's school records. The acceptance letter to the Chicago job sat unopened in the drawer beside me. I told myself I'd go later. Just a year, maybe 2. But the second day after the funeral, when Ethan came home from school with swollen eyes and said, "Rach, can you please not leave? I don't think I can do this alone." The decision was made without ceremony. I sold half my clothes, the guitar I'd had since high school, the extra furniture I'd bought for my soon-to-be apartment in Chicago. I called the company, told them something had come up, thanked them for the opportunity. My voice didn't shake. It was almost frightening how easily the words came. I took a job doing bookkeeping for a local construction company during the day and waited tables at a diner off Highway 285 at night. The tips weren't great, but they were enough. Late shifts became my normal, the rhythm of plates clattering and orders being shouted from the kitchen, drowning out the loneliness I didn't have time to feel. Every month I put a little aside for Ethan. School supplies, new sneakers, field trip fees. By fall, I was scraping enough together to cover his first semester tuition at a decent charter school across town. It meant 3 bus transfers for him every morning, but he never complained. One night in late October, he burst through the door waving a paper in the air. I got an A in math. "Look, Rach." His grin was so wide it made the whole room brighter. I pulled him into a hug, breathing in the scent of pencil shavings and cafeteria food on his jacket. "I'm proud of you," I said. "You keep this up and you're going to have a future nothing like mine." He didn't understand what I meant then. Maybe that was for the best. The years rolled on like that. Work, school bills, late nights, early mornings. By 2014, I'd finally gotten a salary job as a junior financial analyst, climbing slow but steady. I saved every bonus, every tax return, every extra dollar that didn't need to go to the mortgage or utilities. I bought Ethan his first laptop that Christmas. A silver one, slim and fast, the kind of thing I'd never let myself splurge on. I wrapped it carefully, watching his face as he peeled the paper back. "No way," he breathed. "This is... Rachel. This is too much." I shook my head. "It's the start. You said you wanted to learn coding, right? Well, now you can. This is your step forward. The only thing I want is for you to keep trying." He hugged me so suddenly the box nearly fell out of his hands. "You're the best sister in the world," he murmured. "I mean it. Moments like that made everything worth it. Every sleepless shift, every bill paid late because I chose something for him instead. I held on to those moments like they were proof that love, real love, didn't need to be spoken to be understood. But love is funny that way. You give and give, believing your heart can stretch forever. You think it's unconditional because it feels noble to believe that. It took me years to realize the truth. Love is only unconditional when the person receiving it knows its value. I didn't know then what future version of Ethan I was shaping, or what would happen when the world gave him choices that didn't include me. I didn't know how those early sacrifices would twist into a story he didn't remember the same way I did. If I had known, maybe I would have saved more of myself. Maybe I would have learned sooner that giving everything doesn't mean they'll see you. But back then, with his arms wrapped around me, and the snow falling outside, and Mom's picture still framed on the mantel, I believed I was doing the right thing. I believed it so deeply that it became a part of me. And maybe that's why all these years later, a single text could split me open so easily. Saturday mornings in Seattle always felt a little softer than the rest of the week. Like the city finally gave itself permission to slow down. The harbor was wrapped in a pale gray mist when I stepped into the cafe near Pier 62, the kind of local spot that smelled like burnt espresso and wet jackets, a place where no one cared who you were or what job title followed your name. I ordered a black coffee and found a seat near the window, watching fairy lights glow faintly through the fog. I don't know what made me open Instagram. Habit, maybe. A reflex born from years of scanning updates from colleagues, former classmates, hotel investors, people who believed their curated lives mattered to the world. I wasn't expecting anything from family. Ethan rarely posted. When he did, it was pictures of craft beers, weekend hikes, new coding setups. Nothing personal, nothing vulnerable. But the first image that filled my screen made my hand freeze mid-air. Ethan in a tailored black suit, head tilted toward Haley Cooper, as they kissed under a canopy of string lights on some polished rooftop in Austin. Her white dress shimmered like something sponsored. Their friends circled around them, raising glasses, laughing, cheering. The caption read, "The most perfect day of my life." My stomach dropped so fast I felt it in my knees. The cafe noise faded into a dull hum. For a second I wondered if it was a promotional shoot, another staged event Haley used to boost her brand. But no, the details were too sincere. The officiant behind them, the floral arch, the rings. It was their wedding. My brother got married, and I found out on Instagram. I didn't blink, didn't curse, didn't fling my phone across the table the way some part of me wanted to. I just set the device down slowly, my fingers shaking as I placed it next to the coffee cup. The heat from the cup seeped into my palm, grounding me. I forced a smile, one of those reflexive, brittle ones people use when a camera points at them unexpectedly. It wasn't for anyone else. Just a desperate attempt to stop the sting in my chest. No invitation, no phone call, not even a "Hey Rach," just a heads up, nothing. The image burned into me like a spotlight meant for an audience I never asked to be part of. I picked up my phone again and stared at the photo. Ethan's eyes were bright, almost glowing. He looked happy, carefree, in a way I barely recognized. Haley's hand was on his cheek, fingers, perfectly manicured engagement ring blinding in the overhead lights. The voice in my head whispered the words before I could stop it. No invitation, no message, just a stage, and I'm not part of the script anymore. I hit call, straight to voicemail. I tried again, same thing, his recorded voice telling me to leave a message he'd never hear. The third time it rang twice before someone picked up. It wasn't Ethan. "Rachel, hey," Haley said, her voice dipped in that sweet, polished tone influencers mastered so well. "He's a little busy right now. I think you might have seen why." I swallowed hard. "I want to talk to my brother." "Oh, I'm sure you do," she replied, a tiny laugh in her throat. "But today really isn't about you. You know, it's his wedding day." My fingers tightened around the phone. "I'm not trying to make it about me. I just deserve to hear it from him." "Deserve," she echoed, amused. "Rachel, come on. Ethan needs people who support his life, not control it. You've been hovering since he was a kid. He's an adult now. He doesn't need a second mother." The words hit harder than I expected. "I've never tried to be his mother. I just help him, yeah." "I know," she cut in. "You've told him that a million times. Honestly, it's exhausting. He told me how you keep track of everything you've done for him. That's not what family does." My chest tightened. "I never. And, by the way," she added lightly, "thank you for the condo. We absolutely love it. The view is incredible, and the kitchen lighting perfect for filming." I didn't speak, couldn't. Silence stretched just long enough for her confidence to sharpen. "Rachel," she said in a tone I recognized instantly, condescending but cloaked in politeness, the kind people use when they think they're above you. "I think you need to let him go. Let him grow up. Let him have a life that isn't controlled by your checkbook." Something cold settled in me then. A slow, steady freeze that traveled from my spine to the tips of my fingers. I lifted the phone from my ear and held it in front of me for a moment, watching the harbor blur behind the reflection of my own face in the screen. My expression had changed. Softer edges replaced with something harder, clearer. I brought the phone back to my ear. "Haley," I said quietly, "enjoy the condo." She hummed, pleased. "Oh, we will." "Enjoy it," I repeated, "because it's not yours." There was a beat of silence on her end, small but unmistakable. Then I ended the call. I sat there for a long moment, staring out at the boats rocking gently in the water. People walked by the windows with umbrellas, kids laughing, couples holding hands, a world moving forward without a clue that mine had shifted again. The fog lifted slightly over the harbor, revealing the outlines of the ferries coming in from Bainbridge Island. I watched the water churn behind them, white foam dissolving into gray waves. Something in my chest tightened, then unclenched. All at once, the hurt didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a decision waiting to be made. My eyes drifted back to my phone, now face down on the table. The screen was dark, still, quiet. I wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup, letting the heat seep into my fingers as I stared out at the water. I didn't know exactly what I would do next. But I knew this much: I wasn't going to be erased quietly. The drive into Denver felt longer than usual, even though I'd made the trip hundreds of times. Maybe it was because I knew the silence waiting for me inside that house would be heavier than anything the highway could offer. The closer I got to my parents' neighborhood, the more my chest tightened. A mix of dread obligation and something I didn't want to call hope. Maybe part of me still believed someone would open the door with an explanation, or at least a sliver of remorse. Their house looked exactly the same as it had since I was a teenager. White siding, blue shutters, the porch swing that creaked even in the gentlest breeze. But something felt off. Maybe it was the new photo frame sitting on the porch table, propped up like a trophy. I recognized it immediately, even from the car window. Ethan and Haley smiling as if the world had been designed specifically to celebrate them. I parked along the curb and sat for a moment. The sky was bright, too bright for the way my stomach felt. I inhaled, held the breath, then exhaled slowly. My hands steadied just enough to reach for the keys. When I rang the bell, I heard the muffled scrape of a chair, then footsteps. My father, Robert, opened the door, his expression warm in the way people look when they're proud of something they had no part in creating. "Rachel," he said, stepping aside. "Come in." The living room greeted me like a time capsule. The brown leather sofa, the dated curtains, the outdated carpet. Mom had once insisted still had life in it, but what drew my eyes instantly was the picture on the coffee table. Ethan and Haley again, this time in a silver frame. The same rooftop wedding photo I'd seen online. "Look at him," Dad said with a low chuckle, dropping into his recliner like he'd been waiting for this moment. The boy's finally a man, married, settled, doing just fine. My jaw tightened. He didn't tell me, Dad. Robert reached for the remote, lowering the volume of whatever talk show he'd been watching. Well, sweetheart, you've been busy. High-powered finance job, big responsibilities. No one wants to bother you. That's not why I said firmly. I'm asking why no one thought I deserved to know. He turned to look at me, fully irritation tightening his expression. Rachel, you've always had this need to direct everything. Maybe people are tired of feeling like you're the one calling all the shots. I blinked. Calling the shots, I supported him. I kept him afloat for 15 years. Dad shrugged. And maybe that's the problem. My breath caught in my throat. Problem. I repeated. Helping my brother was a problem. Before he could answer, my mother stepped into the room, carrying a folded blanket. Margaret. Always tidy, always worried about appearances. Her eyes darted between us, already bracing for tension. Rachel, honey, she said gently, let's not start this. I'm not starting anything, I said, though. My voice trembled, despite my best effort. I'm asking a simple question. Why didn't anyone tell me Ethan was getting married? Mom's lips pressed into a line. Because you tend to react strongly. And this was a peaceful moment for him. For everyone. I stared at her. React strongly. Mom, I found out on Instagram. She placed the blanket on the armrest, smoothing it unnecessarily. You can be overwhelming sometimes. You've always been very intense. Intense, I echoed. You mean responsible? Dad scoffed. Responsible doesn't mean controlling. I felt something in my chest twist. Controlling. I paid for his tuition, his rent, his debts, his condo. You call that controlling? Mom stepped closer, her voice soft but patronizing in that familiar way she used when she thought she was being reasonable. Rachel, sometimes when you do so much for someone, you make them feel small. The air left my lungs. I stared at her, and for a moment the room went completely silent, except for the ceiling fan humming overhead. Small, I said quietly. I made him feel small by keeping him alive, by giving up everything so he could have a chance. Neither of them responded. Their silence was worse than anything they could have said. I looked around the room at the photos still hanging on the walls. Birthdays, graduations, family vacations. I searched for one with me and Ethan after Mom died. There weren't many. They never updated those. Dad finally sighed like he'd grown tired of the conversation. Rachel, the boy's grown. He's married now. It's time for you to let him handle his own life. You've done enough. That's the first thing you've said today that I agree with, I replied. Mom flinched at the edge in my tone. Rachel. But I was already turning away. I walked toward the front door, my footsteps slow, heavy, but certain. The air outside hit me like a wave. Cool, crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from the yard. I stepped onto the porch and paused, looking back at the house that had once held every piece of my childhood. The windows reflected the sky, pale and cloudless. The porch swing creaked just a little. For a moment, I imagined Mom standing there folding laundry, humming to herself. The memory was soft, warm, but that warmth wasn't here anymore. Independence. They'd said the word so casually, as if it were a gift they'd always encouraged, instead of something I built because no one else stepped up. If independence is what they want, I'll give it to them. Independence in every sense. Independence without my money, without my safety net, without the version of me they only appreciated when it served them. I stepped off the porch, hearing the faint crunch of gravel beneath my shoes. The wind picked up across the yard, brushing strands of hair across my cheek as the door closed behind me with a soft click that felt like finality. I didn't look back again. Seattle looked different at night. Sharper somehow, like the city held its breath between the glow of the buildings and the quiet pulse of the streets below. From my apartment on the 21st floor, the windows stretched wall to wall, framing the skyline like a painting. Normally, the view comforted me. Tonight, it didn't touch the heaviness in my chest. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, toed off my heels, and walked straight to my desk without turning on the main lights. The dim, ambient glow from the city was enough. I opened my laptop, the soft chime echoing in the room like a cue for something I didn't want to name. The spreadsheet opened automatically, one I kept meticulously organized for years, full of transfers and budgets and responsibilities. No one else ever bothered to understand. I clicked the tab labeled Family Expenses, my heart thumping too slowly as if trying to regulate itself before the truth fully surfaced. The numbers appeared in neat rows. Austin condo mortgage, 350,000 European education fund, 35,000 honeymoon travel expenses, $8,000 utilities and maintenance, approx. $200 monthly internet insurance, MISC, various amounts. Seeing it all laid out like that should have made me angry, overwhelmed, regretful. Instead, I felt blank, like I'd stepped outside my body and was just watching myself move through a list that belonged to someone else. If they think I've been controlling, then I'll stop. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I knew what it meant, what cutting everything off would do, not just to their finances, but to the entire narrative they built about who I was in their lives. Still, I clicked the first cell, then the second. The numbers shifted, recalculating automatically. Negative space where support used to be. A sudden memory flickered in my mind. Ethan at age 17 celebrating his acceptance into his first-choice tech program, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. He'd said I couldn't have done this without you, Rach. I'd believed him. I'd believed that gratitude would last. I pushed the memory away and kept working. A faint ache traveled up my spine from the hours I'd spent sitting at work, but I ignored it. I opened a new tab and typed a keyword search. Revoke financial responsibility obligations housing ownership rights. Dozens of legal articles appeared. My phone buzzed beside me. For a second, I thought it was Ethan. It wasn't, just a marketing alert from Harborline Hotels. I flipped the phone over, screen down, and continued. Finally, I tapped the call icon and scrolled to Morgan Reed. Morgan picked up on the third ring. Rachel. Everything okay? It's late. Her voice carried that blend of competence and warmth that made her such a good attorney. And an even better friend. I need to ask you something, I said, steadying my voice. Hypothetically, if someone has been financially supporting a family member and everything is in their own name, how cleanly can they pull out? There was a pause. Is this about Ethan? Yes. Another pause longer. What happened? I didn't want to open that wound again, not tonight. He got married. I wasn't told. And apparently I'm pathetic. Morgan exhaled sharply. Rachel, I don't need comfort. I need clarity. Okay, she said, shifting into attorney mode. Everything is legally yours. You purchased the condo. You opened the fund. You paid for the tickets. Any recurring utilities are tied to your accounts. Unless you signed something stating they were gifts you have full authority to revoke. So I can cancel everything. You can, she said gently, and no one can sue you successfully for it. That was all I needed. Thank you, Morgan. Rachel. Wait, are you doing this because you're hurt? Or because it's time? Both. I answered, but only one of those matters legally. Morgan didn't argue. She knew better than anyone that my decisions were rarely impulsive. I'll email you the necessary documents, she said. Sign them when you're ready. I'm ready. After we hung up, the silence in the apartment felt heavier than before. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly, grounding myself. The trembling in my hands had stopped. That scared me a little. It meant the shock was fading, and something firmer was taking its place. I returned to the desk, clicked print. And listened as the printer hummed to life. Page after page slid out. Mortgage authorization fund closure forms, airline refund requests, cancellation notices. Physical proof of every sacrifice I had made. Proof I was about to reclaim. I gathered the papers and laid them out neatly on the dining table. The pen felt cold between my fingers. I signed the first page, then the next, and the next. My signature swept across the lines like something practiced inevitable. Cutting off kindness isn't easy, but keeping it alive for people who don't value it hurts more. When the last signature dried, I capped the pen and placed it beside the stack. The weight of the documents felt strange in my hands, not heavy, but significant, like holding the final chapter of a book you didn't realize you'd been writing alone. I took photos of each page and sent them to Morgan with a simple message, "Proceed." She responded a minute later. Got them. I'll handle the filings tomorrow. I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark water. A ferry horn echoed faintly from Elliott Bay. My apartment felt both too quiet and too soul at the same time, as if the air itself understood what I had done. For years I'd been the dependable one, the fixer, the provider, the person who carried the invisible weight without complaint. But something about tonight, about ending what everyone else assumed would last forever, made me feel taller somehow, steadier. I turned off the lamp, letting the soft glow from the skyline illuminate the room. Then I gathered the documents, placed them in a folder, and set it by the door for mailing in the morning. My hands were still. My breath was even. It was done. Or at least the part I controlled was. The morning air in Seattle had that particular sting it gets in early winter, cold enough to wake you up, sharp enough to remind you that nothing in this city stays warm for long. I wrapped my hands around a fresh mug of coffee and stood by the window for a moment, watching the steam rise and disappear against the glass. The sky was pale, the kind of washed-out blue that promised a quiet day. It felt fitting. I set the mug on the counter and walked back to my desk, opening my laptop. The folder of documents I'd prepared last night was still sitting beside it, an unnerving reminder that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. My fingers hovered over the trackpad before I forced myself to move. I opened my email and typed the subject line for the first message, account cancellation confirmation. Then I clicked the number for the bank. A robotic voice greeted me, followed by the usual maze of prompts. When I finally reached a representative, my tone was steady. Yes, I'd like to confirm the cancellation of all automatic transfers associated with account ending in 2047. Yes, including the recurring mortgage payments. Yes, I understand the implications. The representative confirmed everything, unaware of the way each word seemed to chip away a part of the life I'd lived for more than a decade. When the call ended, I sat back for a second, staring at my reflection in the dark part of the screen. Hair slightly messy from sleep, eyes tired but alert. Next came the airline. I pulled up the booking receipts for the honeymoon flights, Austin to Santorini returning through London. When I purchased them, I imagined Ethan sending pictures of sunsets and the blue domes of Oia. I thought he'd tell me about the food, the beaches, the way the Aegean looked at sunrise. Now, with a few clicks, I submitted the cancellation request. An automated email pinged back almost instantly. Refund processed, 8,000 estimated return, 5 to 7 business days. Another thread cut cleanly. The 529 college savings account was more complicated. I logged into the education fund portal, entered my credentials, and waited for the dashboard to load. All those years of deposits, monthly contributions, annual lump sums from my bonuses. Small amounts I'd set aside every time I skipped something unnecessary for myself. I clicked withdraw. Entire balance. A warning message popped up. Are you sure this action may incur penalties? I hesitated for less than a breath before confirming. Refund $31,500 will be transferred to primary account ending in 2947. The number stared back at me. It was more than money. It was time. It was sacrifice. It was love I thought would anchor us forever. People think I'm cold. I'm not. I'm just surviving. I checked the time. It wasn't even 9 in yet. My coffee was still warm. The last task required more steps. I opened the real estate portal and clicked list property. The condo in Austin appeared with its details. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, skyline view. I'd chosen that unit myself, imagining Ethan coming home from his first real job, dropping his backpack on the couch, calling me to say thank you. Now I filled out the listing activation form, scheduled the appraisal visit, and attached the scanned ownership documents Morgan had confirmed. Everything was in my name. Every dollar had been mine. When I hit submit, the page updated automatically. Listing pending review. It would go live in a few hours. My throat tightened, not with regret, but with something quieter, heavier. I closed the laptop gently and let my hands fall to my lap. The room around me was brightening sunlight, catching the edges of the furniture, warming the hardwood floors. I didn't feel warm. I stood, walked to the hallway closet, and reached for the small box on the top shelf. The same box I'd opened at the office the day before. I brought it to the sofa, sat down, and lifted the lid. The photo of Ethan at 10 years old sat on top. He was missing a front tooth, holding a soccer trophy he'd won for most improved. His hair stuck up in every direction from running around the field. He was grinning at me from the past, from a time before grief and obligation twisted our lives into knots. I brushed my thumb across the picture. My eyes burned, but no tears came. I wanted to feel anger, betrayal, sadness, something. Instead, I felt a hollow ache not sharp enough to break me, not dull enough to ignore. Love doesn't mean you have to keep suffering for someone. I placed the photo back in the box and closed it softly, letting the finality of it settle through me. Then I rose, walked the box back to the closet, and returned to my desk. My email pinged. Subject listing confirmed. Austin condo active on market. The words glowed on the screen as if announcing something monumental. It's done. I whispered the words without realizing it. It's done. The city outside carried on, traffic flowing across the bridge, distant horns echoing, seagulls calling out over Elliott Bay. Normal sounds on a morning that didn't feel normal at all. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet settle. The kind of quiet that comes when a storm has passed, even if the debris is still scattered everywhere. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding everything together. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding him together. And somehow that realization felt like both an ending and a beginning. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the morning sink in, letting the decisions I'd made shape themselves into whatever came next. I didn't know what the consequences would be for Ethan, or for me. All I knew was that I had chosen myself. And the moment I did, the world didn't collapse. It simply shifted. The notifications started while I was still in the middle of presenting quarterly revenue projections to the board. At first, I thought it was just the usual stream of emails. Vendor updates, contract adjustments, maybe a message from one of the hotel partners in Vancouver. But the vibration didn't stop. It buzzed again, and again, then again so insistently that even the CFO of Harborline Hotels couldn't pretend not to notice. I slid my phone face down on the table, forcing myself to stay focused on the screen behind me. As you can see, the Harborline waterfront renovation should stabilize mid-year expenses. Another buzz, then another, a rapid string of them. My pulse flickered. I wrapped up the meeting more quickly than anyone expected, answering final questions with mechanical precision, gathering my laptop the second the last executive stood. I stepped into my office and shut the door behind me, exhaling once the latch clicked. Then the phone buzzed again. I turned it over. 10 missed calls, 14 message alerts, 3 dozen app notifications, and at the top of the screen, Chloe Daniels. I answered immediately. Chloe. Her voice came fast, tight. Rachel, have you seen what's happening? No, I said slowly. I've been in a meeting. You need to get online right now. Your name is everywhere. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, everywhere? Someone leaked it, she said. Your involvement with Ethan. The financial support. The condo. Everything. I crossed the room, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop with hands that felt both numb and burning. Who leaked it? No idea. But the story's picking up fast. My email was flooded. Article links, subject lines in all caps. 12 people from PR asking if I planned to issue a statement. I clicked the first link Chloe sent. Seattle, woman, cuts off brother financially. Right after his wedding. Below it, a photo pulled from my corporate bio. Professional, polished, repurposed without permission. I scrolled. Comment sections burned with hot takes. She's a queen. Finally, someone stands up to manipulative family members. She's heartless. Who does that typical, controlling older sister move? Good for her. Boundaries matter. Then, isn't she the one paying for their condo LMAO? They're screwed now? My jaw clenched. I kept scrolling. Other outlets had picked it up already. Smaller blogs, local news aggregators, even a lifestyle page that usually covered celebrity divorces and new restaurants. Chloe's voice snapped me back. Rach, I'm so sorry. I don't know who fed them the details, but it's messy. People are debating whether you're a villain or some kind of feminist icon. It's chaos. A knot tightened behind my ribs. They don't know anything. I know, Chloe said. That's why I called. If you want me to publish a counterpiece or clarify facts or... No, I closed the browser. Let it be. Are you sure you have every right to set the record straight? The public doesn't care about the truth, I said quietly. They just want a story. A silence settled on the line. Her understanding my exhaustion. Before either of us spoke again, another email alert appeared. The preview line made my breath catch. From Ethan. Subject. What did you do? I opened it. Rachel, the bank froze our accounts. Our mortgage app says the condo is under review. Haley's freaking out. My cards aren't working. What's going on? Please respond. My chest tightened, not with regret, but with a tired ache that felt heavier than anger ever could. Another email popped up before I could finish reading. Then another. A new subject line flashed. Why would you do this to us? Then, answer me. The dots of a new message appeared, each one making the screen feel smaller, the air thicker. I didn't reply. Chloe's voice came back softly. He reached out. Yes. What did he say? Exactly what I expected him to. Chloe exhaled. Say the word and I'll step in. No, I said, closing the email tab. Let silence do the work. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a notification. His name lit up the screen. Ethan. I didn't move, didn't speak. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. And again. Eventually, I flipped the phone over so the screen faced the desk, but the vibration still rattled through the wood, persistent, almost frantic. My heart beat steady even, steadier than it had any right to. I stood and walked toward the window, watching the clouds roll in from the sound. The day had gone from gray to charcoal in a matter of minutes, wind picking up enough to shake the tops of the trees lining the pier. Seattle felt heavier, like the city sensed a storm coming. Behind me, the phone rang once more, vibrating against the desk with a staccato urgency. I reached over, pressed the side button, and shut the device off completely. The sudden silence was startling, but it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I slipped the phone into my drawer, straightened my jacket, and walked out of my office. The air outside carried the chilled bite of November, the wind tugging at the ends of my hair as I stepped onto the First Avenue. Storm clouds gathered above the waterfront, rolling low and dark across the sky. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking, letting the wind push at me, letting it carry away the noise still clinging to my thoughts. Whatever was coming next, I didn't need to run from it. I'd already made my choice. 2 months later, I stepped out of the rental car in front of the Travis County Civil Courthouse in Austin. The air warmer than any February day had the right to be. The sky was sharp and blue, the kind of morning that would have felt hopeful if not for why I was there. I smoothed the front of my blazer, simple charcoal gray, nothing flashy, and took a steady breath. Morgan walked beside me, her heels clicking confidently against the concrete. You ready? She asked, adjusting the file tucked under her arm. As I'll ever be. Inside, the courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and overworked air conditioning. The hallway buzzed with attorneys carrying briefcases, couples arguing in whispers, a few lost tourists looking for traffic court. My case, our case, felt painfully personal in a building full of strangers. The courtroom door opened as we approached, and Haley stepped out first, phone already angled in her hand. She lifted it slightly, pretending to check a notification, but the camera lens glinted at me. I didn't break stride. Behind her came Ethan. His hair was unkempt, darker under the fluorescent lights. His shirt, wrinkled a size too big, hung awkwardly on him. For a split second, I saw a boy again, the same lanky kid who used to fall asleep on the sofa after finishing homework. But then his expression hardened the moment he saw me. Seriously, he muttered. You actually came. Morgan didn't give him the chance to say more. Let's keep this civil, she said, her voice calm but firm. Haley rolled her eyes. Civil would have been her leaving the condo alone instead of sabotaging our life. I met her gaze. It was never your condo. Her fingers tightened on the phone, but she said nothing. We entered the courtroom where the bailiff announced our arrival. The judge, Grace Nguyen, sat poised behind the bench. Stern, unreadable, the type of woman whose silence was louder than most people's shouting. All rise, the bailiff said. We did. Then we sat. The scrape of chairs echoed across the room. Judge Nguyen looked from one table to the other. We're here in the matter of Monroe versus Monroe. The plaintiff claims rightful ownership of a property located in Austin, Texas, on the grounds that it was gifted to him. The defendant disputes this, citing full financial responsibility and sole ownership. She clasped her hands. Let's begin. Ethan's attorney rose first, a middle-aged man with a too-bright tie and the kind of swagger that belonged more in late-night commercials than in a courtroom. Your Honor. He began. My client was given the condo as a wedding gift by his sister. There was clear intent, financial support over many years, consistent payment of expenses, and verbal indications that the property was his. Grace lifted an eyebrow. Verbal indications. Yes, the attorney said confidently. He believed, reasonably, that the home was being provided to him permanently. I didn't roll my eyes, but it was close. Morgan stood next. Your Honor, we will present documented proof that every payment on the condo, down payment mortgage installments, property taxes, insurance, came directly from my client's personal accounts. There is no transfer of ownership, no written declaration of gift, and no evidence that the property was meant to be relinquished. Judge Nguyen nodded. Proceed. Ethan took the stand first. His voice shook not with emotion, but with frustration. She controlled everything, every part of my life. The money, the bills, the decisions. She said she wanted me to succeed, but she never let me do anything without her involvement. The words stung, even though I'd heard variations of them before. His attorney pressed on. And how did you feel when she suddenly revoked all support? How do you think Ethan snapped? I lost my job. Our accounts were frozen. We were blindsided. She ruined everything. My stomach twisted. This wasn't truth. It was fear speaking. The version of reality he needed to believe so he wouldn't face the weight of his own choices. Morgan approached the stand slowly. Mr. Monroe, did you ever pay a single mortgage bill? Ethan hesitated. No. Property tax. No. Home insurance. Another shake of his head. Did you ever contribute funds to the down payment? Silence. Did your sister ever sign a deed transferring ownership to you? No, he muttered. But she... Thank you, Morgan said, turning away before he could finish. No further questions. Then it was my turn. I sat straighter than I felt when I was sworn in. The courtroom was cold, the kind of cold that settles deep into your bones. Judge Nguyen looked at me. Miss Monroe, in your own words, why did you withdraw support? I answered without hesitation. Because they told me they wanted independence. I respected that. Ethan shook his head violently. That's not what we meant. I kept my eyes on the judge. Your Honor, I supported my brother for 15 years. Every cent, every bill, every crisis. But I wasn't told he was getting married. I found out through social media, and when I asked why I was told I was pathetic and overbearing, I drew a slow breath, so I stopped. That's all. Whispers rippled through the gallery. People who'd wandered in from other cases now fully invested. Judge Nguyen lifted a hand, restoring silence. Thank you, Ms. Monroe. Ethan's attorney attempted a rebuttal, but it fell flat. Every point circled back to one undeniable fact. Nothing was in Ethan's name. Morgan submitted the paperwork, color-coded tabs, highlighted lines, every financial trail leading back to me. When she finished, the judge leaned back thoughtful. Truth is not emotional, she said. It is factual and documented. My heart steadied. Grace looked directly at Ethan. You may feel wronged, Mr. Monroe, but the evidence is clear. The condo was never gifted, never transferred, and never legally yours. Then her gaze shifted to the courtroom clerk. Judgment is entered for the defendant, Ms. Rachel Monroe. The property remains under her sole ownership. This case is dismissed. A gavel struck. Sharp. Final. Ethan stared at me stunned. Haley lowered her phone, her expression collapsing into something small brittle. I stood smoothing my blazer and followed Morgan toward the exit. The courtroom doors opened, letting in a warm gust from the hallway, stirring my hair slightly. Outside, the Texas sun was bright, almost blinding after the cold fluorescent lights inside. I felt it on my face. Not victory, not triumph, just relief. A soft smile pulled at the corner of my mouth. Not pride, not smugness. Just release. The wind lifted my hair as we walked down the courthouse steps. For the first time in a long time, the weight wasn't mine anymore. 1 month after the hearing, I heard about Ethan's situation the same way everyone else did, through the articles that had once turned me into a headline. Only this time the spotlight wasn't on me. It was on them. Influencer couple faces financial collapse after losing major sponsorships. Tech engineer fired. Amid personal scandal, from fairy tale wedding to harsh reality. What happened to Haley and Ethan Monroe? The headlines were everywhere, resurfacing on my newsfeed. Whether I wanted them there or not. I tried not to open them, but curiosity has its own gravity. When I finally clicked one, the details spilled out in stark, unfriendly print. Ethan had been laid off from his startup after ongoing performance issues. Haley's brand deals had dried up after several companies quietly pulled back once the condo ownership scandal went public. And their attempt to sue me had backfired so publicly that even people who didn't know us carried an opinion. Karma doesn't need to be fast. It only needs to find the right address. That thought came unbidden like a whisper I didn't want to admit was mine. But it was true. Some actions come full circle whether you push them or not. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of Austin, one so different from the condo they once flaunted, I imagined Ethan sitting exactly the way the reporters described him, hunched over a scratched dining table phone in hand, screen dead because he'd stopped paying the bill. Emails still reached him, though. Overdue notices don't need a functioning phone. Past due, $468. Final warning before collections. The words would have pricked something inside me years ago. They would have sent me into action. Calling the bank, transferring money, smoothing over the mess before he even had to face it. But not anymore. He had to face it now. I pictured him opening the fridge, seeing only half-empty condiment bottles, and a carton of milk he couldn't remember buying. Haley's ring light would still be leaning against the wall unplugged. The space where her clothing racks once stood would be empty ghost-like, because she was already gone. I didn't have to imagine the moment she left. I heard it later, from someone who'd been in the building at the time. The argument, the slam of the door, Haley's sharp voice cutting through the walls. "I'm tired, Ethan. You have nothing left to offer me. Nothing to hold me here." She left the apartment key on the counter and walked out carrying 2 suitcases, and her phone angled just right, recording the last shot she'd posted for weeks. A tearful goodbye with no mention of him. He was alone. Back in Seattle, the rain drummed lightly against my office window as I finished typing a report. Another Monday. Another quiet moment between meetings. When my phone lit up with Mom, I hesitated before answering. She rarely called unless something was wrong. I hit accept. "Rachel," my mother said immediately, breathless, as if she'd been crying or rushing. "He's falling apart." I didn't respond. "Not yet," she continued before I could. "Your brother. He's lost his job. He's lost his home. He has nothing left. He regrets everything. Everything." I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to do something." Margaret snapped. "He's your brother. He's hurting." "I didn't take anything from him," I said softly. "I stopped giving." "That's not the same." Her voice dropped to a lower, wounded tone. "You're being cruel." I sat up straighter. "Cruel." "You called me controlling for years. Dad said I was smothering him. Ethan said I was pathetic. I stepped back. Exactly what all of you claimed you wanted." "That's different," she insisted. "You know he can't manage on his own." I let out a breath. Then maybe he shouldn't have shoved away the only person who ever helped him. Silence stretched across the line, heavy, accusing, and fragile all at once. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its previous sharpness. "Rachel, please, he's your brother, and I'm his sister," I said. "Not his wallet, not his mother, not his safety net, just his sister. And right now distance is the only thing keeping me sane." There was another pause. Then she whispered, "I don't understand you anymore." I think I said gently, "This is the first time you're seeing me." The phone line crackled faintly. I knew she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say. When I hung up, the room felt still. Not peaceful, not tense, just still. The rain outside softened into a mist, blurring the skyline beyond my window. I stood and walked toward the glass, watching droplets race downward. My reflection stared back at me, tired but steady. A month ago, this kind of conversation would have crushed me. Now it didn't even shake me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt honest. For once, I wasn't pretending to carry more than I could bear. I opened the window slightly, letting the cool air brush my face. Seattle smelled like wet pavement and pine, familiar and strangely soothing. Behind me, my phone buzzed softly. A text from an unknown number. I didn't check it. Not yet. Instead, I kept my eyes on the shifting clouds over Puget Sound. The water below rippled under the wind, gray and restless. My expression wasn't cold, just calm. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a storm waiting to happen. I felt like the sky after it. The conference room buzzed with the kind of energy only a gathering of ambitious women could create. Focused, sharp, and quietly electric. Rows of chairs filled the ballroom of the downtown Seattle Marriott, the stage framed with navy drapes and warm lighting. The sign outside the door read, "Women and Finance Summit, hosted by Elena Cruz." I slipped into a seat near the back, not wanting attention. Not wanting anything except a moment to breathe somewhere. No one expected anything from me. Elena stood center stage, her presence commanding without being overbearing. She wore a simple white blazer, hair pulled back, speaking with a clarity that cut through the murmurs in the room. "Ladies," she said, pacing slowly, "you do not owe anyone an apology for protecting yourselves. You do not owe anyone explanations for your boundaries. They are not selfish. They are necessary." I felt something in my chest tighten. Recognition, maybe, or the sting of a truth I had spent years avoiding. Boundaries. A word that used to feel foreign on my tongue. I pulled out my notebook, the one I used more for clarity than for work, and began to jot down sentences as they came. "You're not responsible for another adult's stability. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. Silence is not weakness. You can stop giving without becoming the villain." Elena continued, her voice rising just enough to reach the corners of the room. "Women are taught to say yes always. Say yes to caretaking. Yes to emotional labor. Yes to picking up the pieces. But success requires a powerful no. A grounded no. A no that saves your sanity." A ripple of agreement moved through the audience. Soft murmurs, small nods. I wasn't sure how I looked from the outside, but inside those words pressed deep, opening something I didn't know was sealed, because for so long my identity had been built around yes. Yes, Ethan. Yes, Mom. Yes, Dad. Yes, I'll fix it. Yes, I'll pay it. Yes, I'll rescue you. Yes, I'll be the one who keeps the world from collapsing beneath you. But all that yes had left nothing for me. After the session ended, people lined up to ask Elena questions or take photos. I stayed in my seat waiting for the crowd to thin. When Elena finally stepped off the stage, she scanned the room, pausing when her eyes landed on me. She smiled and walked over. "Rachel Monroe, right?" I blinked. "You know who I am." "I do," she said gently. "I read your story." I stiffened. "Oh, that. You've inspired a lot of women," she added. "Whether you meant to or not." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I wasn't trying to teach anyone. I was just done apologizing for existing. Elena nodded, her expression soft. "That's exactly why your story matters. Women don't need perfect examples. They need real ones." I swallowed. I didn't feel like an example of anything. I felt like someone learning how to stand on her own legs again after years of carrying someone else. "Look," she said, reaching out to lightly squeeze my arm. "Healing isn't glamorous. It's quiet, private. But it's the strongest thing you'll ever do." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She gave my arm one more soft squeeze and moved on to greet another attendee, leaving me with the faint sensation that someone had just turned on a light inside a room I'd left dark for years. I gathered my notebook, tucked it into my bag, and stepped outside. Evening had fallen over Seattle, the streets damp from a light mist. Traffic hummed, streetcar bells chimed faintly, and the city seemed alive in the soft kind of way only Seattle can be, subdued but full of heart. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes, set my bag down, and opened my laptop just to clear the last few emails before bed. But the moment the screen lit up, a new message appeared at the top of my inbox. From Chloe Daniels. Subject, "You're trending again." I clicked, "Your stories," at the top of trending articles this week. And look at this. She pasted a comment that made me blink. "She's the quiet strength women need. Proof that you can walk away without shouting." I stared at it for a long moment, letting the words melt into me. Quiet strength. The kind that doesn't roar. The kind that doesn't need to justify itself. The kind that stands on its own 2 feet, steady and unshaking. My apartment felt especially still. Not empty, just peaceful. A peace that wasn't born from lack, but from reclaiming something I had given away freely for too long. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and walked toward my bedroom. The city outside glimmered through the windows, cars, passing apartment lights, flickering on distant sirens, echoing softly. Seattle wasn't silent, but inside me, there was finally quiet. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. A gentle sort of ease, the kind that whispered, "You're allowed to rest now." The kind that didn't demand anything except stillness, The kind that let me drift slowly into the first real calm I'd felt in a long time. The rain had been falling for hours, the kind of heavy, relentless downpour Seattle was infamous for. Thick streaks against the glass gutters overflowing the whole world washed in silver beneath the streetlights. I'd left the window cracked open just enough to let in the sound of it, hoping it would lull me to sleep. It didn't. My body was tired, but my mind was still tracing the edges of the day, circling the quiet peace I'd finally started to feel. I was halfway under the blanket when the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize illuminated the dark bedroom. My first instinct was to ignore it. Wrong hour, wrong number, wrong energy. But something told me to pick it up. Maybe it was the way the screen pulsed in the shadows, or the way the storm outside seemed to hush for just a moment. I answered without speaking. On the other end, I heard breathing, uneven, shaky. Then, Rachel. It's me. Ethan. His voice was cracked open in a way I hadn't heard since he was 14, sitting with me on that porch the day Mom died. It startled something deep inside me. Memory ache, instinct. But I didn't say his name. I waited. He swallowed loudly. Haley left. She took the rest of her stuff today. I don't know what to do. The pause between his words wasn't dramatic. It was defeated, like each syllable had to climb its way out. I stared at the rain sliding down the window, each line catching the orange glow of the street lamp. He continued, voice trembling. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you, but I don't have anyone else to call. Still, I didn't answer. He exhaled shakily. Please say something. I finally breathed quietly. You told me I was controlling. Remember. That was Haley, he said, fast, desperate. I let her get in my head. I shouldn't have said it. I didn't mean it. You said it. I replied, my tone steady. You believed it longed enough to build a life without me. Thunder rolled in the distance. He sniffed, maybe crying, maybe trying not to. I don't know how to live like this, he whispered. I don't have a job. I don't have money. I don't have her. I don't have anything. For a moment, the image of that 10-year-old boy came back to me. The one who ran home from school with scraped knees, who clutched spelling tests to his chest, who asked if I could stay just a little longer after lights out, but that boy wasn't the man on the phone, and I wasn't the girl who sacrificed everything to protect him. I hear the kid you used to be, I said quietly. Not the man you are, Rachel, please, he whispered. Just give me a chance to fix things. I'll make it right. I swear. I'll do anything. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm letting you be exactly who you told me you wanted to be. Independent. That's not what I meant. It's what you said. His breath hitched. Then tell me what to do. Please. Just tell me where to start. I'll listen. I'll change. For most of my life, those words would have been enough to pull me back in. They would have cracked me open, undone every boundary I ever tried to build. Not tonight. Your chance, I said slowly, is this moment, this lesson. Survive it, grow from it, and stop expecting someone else to catch you. He didn't respond. I heard only the rain, the low hum of passing cars, the soft static of loss settling between us. Rachel. He finally whispered, don't hang up. But I'd already made my peace. I lifted the phone from my ear and listened to the muffled sound of him still talking, soft, small, broken. Then my thumb pressed the screen. The call ended mid-sentence. The room exhaled around me as if it too had been holding its breath. The rain resumed its rhythm, sliding down the glass in slow, shimmering lines. I set the phone on the nightstand screen down and leaned back against the pillows. My heartbeat steadied, my breath deepened. For the first time in years, I wasn't overwhelmed, or guilty, or torn apart. I was calm. Silence wasn't a weapon tonight. It was closure. The next morning, the world looked almost too bright. Seattle had shaken off the storm overnight, leaving the sky washed clean and pale yellow sunlight stretching across the skyline. When I walked into my office at Harborline Hotels, the floor-to-ceiling windows glowed with the soft kind of daylight that normally signaled a fresh start. I set my bag down, shrugged off my coat, and crossed to the window. The air smelled faintly like rain, clean, sharp, familiar. I unlatched the window and pushed it open just a few inches. A breeze drifted in, lifting the edges of the documents on my desk. My phone, lying next to my computer, lit up again. Another missed call from Ethan. 10. Just from this morning. A scroll through the notifications revealed at least 20 more from earlier. Calls, voicemails, and short, desperate text messages sent between dawn and now. I didn't open any of them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said. The phone buzzed in my hand, vibrating like a heart beating too fast. I looked at the screen for a long moment. The name meant something to me once. For so long it meant responsibility. It meant sacrifice. It meant love. Now it meant history, something that happened, something that mattered, but something that didn't decide my future anymore. I turned the phone face down on the desk. I don't need revenge. I need peace. The room felt still after that, still in a way I had never let it be before. No guilt, no fear, just a quiet acceptance settling deep inside me like a warm stone. I inhaled slowly, and when I exhaled, I felt lighter. By mid-morning, I closed out my work tasks, set my out-of-office notice for the afternoon, and slipped out of the building. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't have to. I drove until the skyline fell behind me, until the roads narrowed, and the smell of salt water grew strong enough to drown out everything else. I parked near Golden Gardens Beach and walked toward the shoreline. The sand was cold beneath my feet when I slipped off my shoes. The tide was low waves curling gently against the shore. The cries of gulls circled overhead, carried by the wind. I walked until my toes brushed the edge of the water, icy, and sharp enough to wake every nerve in my body. The ocean stretched out in front of me, gray and endless. I felt small next to it, but not in the way my family had made me feel. Not diminished, not dismissed, just human. Quiet. Present. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. People think justice is about winning or losing, but sometimes justice is walking away from the pain that tried to claim you. Sometimes it's choosing silence, not because you're weak, but because you're done explaining your worth to people determined not to see it. The wind tugged at my hair, sending loose strands across my face. I closed my eyes and let the breeze wash over me. The distant sound of a ferry horn echoed across the bay, low and steady. A reminder that life keeps moving with or without the people who tried to anchor you in place. I thought of Ethan, not the man who accused me or the man who begged me, but the little boy who once believed I could fix anything. That version of him didn't exist anymore. And the version of me who tried to fix everything for him didn't exist either. We had both outgrown the roles we clung to. Only difference was, I learned to let mine go. I walked farther down the beach, the cool sand shifting beneath each step. No phone buzzing, no guilt pressing down, no expectation pulling at me, just the steady rhythm of the waves, and my own breath sinking with the tide. Eventually, I stopped turning to look back at the path behind me. My footprints faded into the wet sand, washed away slowly by the incoming tide. That felt right. Not erased, just released. I stood there until the sun climbed higher, warming my skin, until my heartbeat eased into something soft and even, until every part of me understood that silence wasn't punishment. It was freedom. When I finally turned to leave, I looked out at the water one last time and let the moment settle fully into me. Then I whispered, barely louder than the wind, "I'm done carrying what doesn't belong to me." I walked back toward my shoes, toward the parking lot, toward the life waiting for me, one I'd built, one I'd chosen, one that didn't require me to bleed, just to keep someone else comfortable. And as I reached the edge of the beach, the city stretching out ahead, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in a long, long time. Hope. Soft. Quiet. Real. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel small, remember this. Your worth doesn't depend on anyone's invitation. Your peace doesn't need anyone's permission. And the moment you choose yourself, your life begins to open in ways you never imagined. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts, tell your story, or pass it on to someone who needs the reminder. Your voice matters, and your silence, when chosen, not forced, might be the strongest voice of all.